name is Tyson. I'm a strength and conditioning student at Plymouth University. Today we'll be talking about ankle supination and how to correct it. We will be looking at identifying it. We will be looking at techniques to identify supination within the ankle and how severely they supinate and when they supinate. We will also be looking at potential causes. We will be looking at what the dysfunction causes in terms of other dysfunctions like plantar fasciitis. We will also be looking at the anatomy of the foot and how the anatomy of the foot is affected. We will also be looking at the kinetic chain and how the kinetic chain is also affected by supination during normal movement. It occurs more frequently in the push-off phase of in a running motion. When the heel of the foot is raised, this is when the weight is shifted to the forefoot. When it's shifted to the forefoot, this puts the talocrural joint in a very vulnerable position. And this is when people tend to naturally supinate, but this occurs because of the vulnerability of the talocrural joint, as it is not in a very stable position. The subtalar joint will naturally invert, causing the foot to supinate. This is the best way to identify supination is through what we call a gait analysis. By doing a gait analysis, we can look at how often someone supinates, when they start to supinate in the movement, and then we can look at ways to correct this. The link in the video is a link to a supination gait analysis. Leave the link for the video in the description so you can all have a look at in normal motion in how an in-depth gait analysis would work. Newton 2014 produced an article that looks specifically at functional movement testing within the ankle. This has stated that range of motion testing should be done first before any functional screens, as restrictions in muscle tissue can be the #1 cause of poor movement within the ankle. Hence, this is why we use range of motion testing as a technique to look for supination.
To begin with, we'll be looking at the anterior compartment. Now, the anterior compartment consists of the tibialis anterior, the extensor hallucis longus. Do that. There you go. The extensor digitorum longus and the peroneus tertius, which sits just around the back. Yeah, that's the brevis. There you go. And the tertius, it sits just around the back there. Okay, so now I will discuss their purpose. Now, their purposes are you have the tibialis anterior and the extensor hallucis longus. Their purpose is dorsiflexion and inversion of the foot. And then you have the extensor digitorum longus, which its only purpose is dorsiflexion mainly. And then you have the peroneus tertius, which purpose is mainly for plantar flexion and eversion of the foot. So out of all of them here, I think that during any form of supination movement, the peroneus tertius would definitely come under severe stress. And then you definitely have a very tensioned relationship between the anterior tibialis or tibialis anterior and the extensor hallucis longus, as they would become shortened. So I will now move on to the lateral compartment. Now, the lateral compartment, we have the peroneus brevis and the peroneus longus. Now, these two are mainly for eversion. However, they would definitely come under a lot of stress during any supination movement, as they also do contribute towards plantar flexion as well. They would become severely lengthened during supination, which would put them under a lot of strain, which could lead to injuries. Probably become a lot more vulnerable when they are in a plantar flex position compared to a normal dorsiflex position, as you can see now. On to the posterior muscles. For this next bit, we have the gastrocnemius, we have the plantaris, and then you also have the soleus as well. Now, these muscles have been said to contribute towards plantar flexion. However, I would say out of all of them, the plantaris, which inserts down onto the calcaneus, would probably be the one that has the most effect in plantar flexion compared to the gastrocnemius or soleus. So now we will move on to the deep posterior muscles. Okay, so as you can see, we have some of the deep posterior muscles here. We have the hallucis longus and the digitorum longus, and you may also be able to see the tibialis posterior that creeps in around the side there. But what we also see, they invert mainly, but they also contribute towards plantar flexion as well, as they insert underneath the foot. But they do make bits. We will inversion the joints that are affected, as well as the ligaments that could be affected during any supination movement. So to begin with, we'll be looking at the lateral side, and as you can see, the subtalar joint is this one here that runs just underneath, and then you also have the talocrural joint that sits between the fibula and the talus, and then you have the subtalar joint that sits between the talus and the calcaneus. Now, there are a number of ligaments on the subtalar complex. These ligaments are the calcaneofibular ligament, and then you have the posterior talofibular ligament. You also have the anterior talofibular ligament, as well as the lateral talocalcaneal ligament. Now, all these ligaments in general would be severely affected during any form of supination movement, due to the fact they would be put under a lot of stress, as the subtalar joint does naturally invert during supination. So this would put all these ligaments under a severe amount of strain, and then those are the relevant ligaments to what would be affected during that movement. However, you do have medial ligaments on the other side. However, they would not be as affected. The deltoid ligament, etc., they would not be as affected as the ligaments on the lateral side would be. The subtalar joint is the joint that's the most vulnerable to supination. However, you do have the talocrural joint, which is this one here. But however, the talocrural joint is not as is a lot more stable than the subtalar joint, unless it is in plantar flexion. When it's in plantar flexion, talocrural joint becomes very unstable, and it does next to the fibula as well as the talus from the distal part of the tibia. So that is that for that.
Okay, so for this next bit, we are going to look at ankle supination in relation to the kinetic chain. To begin with, the subtalar joint inverts. This puts strain on the peroneal longus and brevis, as well as the calcaneofibular ligament. The forefoot adducts. This causes strain on the abductor digiti minimi. Talocrural joint plantar plexus, putting it in a very unstable position. This only occurs in some supinated positions, though. The external rotation of the tibia, possibly putting stress on the four flexors of internal rotation, which is the popliteus, the gracilis, the semimembranosus, and semitendinosus. The knee extends into a varus position. This is known to put stress on the LCL. This then leads to hip extension. Pelvic rotation occurs and causes the hip to depress on the side of supination. This in turn leads to the limbosacral joint extending and laterally flexing away from the side of supination, and this is all according to research done by Meninger 2012. Central causes. So, Potential causes of supination are as follows: weakness and tension in the hallucis longus. This is the tension lengthening relationship. So this is when due to the tension in one muscle would lead to lengthening in the other. So tension in the hallucis longus could possibly do lengthening of the peroneal longus and brevis. Weakness and tightness in tibialis posterior, which is very, very common among people who supinate. Types of shoes worn. Weakness in the calcaneofibular ligament. This is also something that would make someone supinate, because if the ligament is not strong enough, it will stretch and be strained, which would then, and that would be due to weakness, due to it not being strong enough to hold the effects of inversion. Like I said, increased lengthening of the peroneal longus and brevis is also a common cause. Prior injury, misalignment in the body, so this could be, like I mentioned, issues further up the kinetic chain. Degenerative processes of the foot and ankle impact on biomechanical functions of the ankle. So degenerative processes may be wear and tear of ligaments over time, or wear and tear of muscle tissue. All references I have put in this slide I will leave in the description for you all to access. Associated with dysfunction, so we have plantar fasciitis, shin splints, chronic back pain. We also have hip pain and varus and valgus stress on the knee. Corrective exercise continuum that I will be following for my corrective exercises go as follow: inhibition, so inhibitory techniques like myofascial release, lengthening techniques like neuromuscular stretching. Then we also have activation techniques, positional isometrics and isolated strengthening, and then integration techniques.
So for this next one, we are going to be doing an inhibitory technique, which is a myofascial release exercise, which is known as the golf ball roll. The way we do this is the ball will be placed on the floor, the athlete will place their foot on top of the ball, and will roll it along the long plantar ligament, otherwise known as the plantar fasciitis ligament, targeting the sore spots. This will be done for 30 to 60 seconds. You'll do about 3 to 5 sets, 4 to 5 times a week. You won't need much of a rest in between, as it's a relatively low intensity exercise. The reason this is done is because a lot of strain occurs when excessive supination happens on the long plantar ligament. This leads to a lot of degeneration on the underside of the foot. It can also lead to micro tears. This exercise also helps with regeneration on muscle tissue on the underside of the foot, as well as preventing micro tears from occurring. All this research was provided by Cafasso and Morrison, as well as Price, two very reliable sources. For this next one, we will look at a lengthening technique, otherwise known as the plantar fasciitis stretch. For this one, what you will do is you will grab the toes, you will bring them back, hold them for 10 seconds, and then release. You will repeat this about 20 to 30 reps. You will do 3 sets, or a frequency of maybe 3 to 5 times a week to begin with a rest of about 30 seconds in between each set. What you will also do is, as doing this exercise, you will release the tension that builds up in the flexors on the underside of the foot due to supination. Once you release this tension, you then help with realigning the underside of the foot. This is all research provided by Cafasso and Morrison. This next one, we are going to be looking at the activation technique, which is the isometric calf stretch. This is because ankle functionality issues like supination cause tight calves. The reason this occurs is because the gastrocnemius cervicalis and the plantaris all get severely irritated during supination. So by doing, and the anterior compartment also gets very weakened. So by doing this, we are strengthening the anterior compartment, which is the anterior tibialis and the extensor hallucis longus, while also realigning the calf muscles at the same time. So to do this one, you get the client to get their foot in a neutral position, and then get them to dig their heel into the floor. While doing this, you also get them to raise their toes as far as possible, hold it for 10 seconds, and then lower. They'll do that about 20 to 30 times. Then about 3 to 5 sets, about 4 to 5 times per week. You You don't need much of a rest in between, as the exercise is not that demanding. And all of this research that has been provided was provided by Cafasso and Morrison. And Price for this technique, we will look at an integration technique, which is a tibialis anterior dynamic stretch. The reason we do this exercise is because a lot of tension builds up in the anterior tibialis, which then leads to calf pain, which this occurs naturally in people who supinate, which was discovered by Cafasso and Morrison. So for this exercise, what you want to do is just get the athlete to stand with their hands on the wall, this knee slightly bent, this leg straightened, and then what they will do is just lower their foot towards the ground, bending the toes, stretching the anterior tibialis, and repeat. This will be done for 20 to 30 reps, 3 sets, with about a minute rest in between. And to begin with, the frequency will be about 3 to 5 times a week.
Okay, and this is the progression stage I was talking about, the ACES progression stage. It is what has been commonly used, according to Evans and Cappaert, 2014, that it's very useful for any correctional exercises. And as you can see, they have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So as the athlete gets more and more, or individual gets more and more less supinated, you would reduce the amount of sessions you have from stage 1 to 3, and hopefully by the end of stage 3 they would be fully sort of cured and be able to walk without supination occurring.